Today we are continuing our series called Won't You Be My Neighbor? And these messages are based or founded in the good news of Jesus Christ that we find in the PBS series called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Now, those of you who are parents or grandparents, you know all about Daniel Tiger. You know how fun Daniel is. You know how influential and inspiring he is. Now, those of you who don't, Daniel Tiger is actually a character created by Mr. Rogers. And if you know Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood is actually the continuation of Mr. Rogers' teachings and all that kind of stuff. So it's really good and inspirational and helpful for all of us, for all ages, and not just the little ones. And so that's why we want to pull some of those lessons that we learn in Daniel Tiger and pull them into our sermon series this summer. Now, today, we want to, matter of fact, before I say what we're going to do today, I just let you know that I believe Daniel is going to be here next week. So if you have little ones, make sure that you bring them to take a picture with Daniel, give Daniel a high five, whatever. Daniel will be here, live and in person, walking around. His parents assured me that he will be on his way. So Daniel will be here, and Trolley will be here. You can take a picture in Trolley. So you don't want to miss next week, okay? It'll be a great weekend. Today we want to talk about how to be a good neighbor. How to be a good neighbor. How many of you have good neighbors? You have good neighbors? Not too many hands up. Okay. All right, good neighbors. Yeah, it's wonderful to have good neighbors. It's terrible to have terrible neighbors, right? Good neighbors, terrible neighbors, whoever they are, they're your neighbor. You know, my dad, it wasn't until I moved out that I realized what kind of neighbor my dad was. He said one Saturday morning, we got a knock at the door. And he looked outside and he saw who it was. It was the Jehovah's Witnesses coming to share their message with us. And so my dad, in order to deter them from returning again, answered the door in his most ripped up drawers. The T-shirt, belly hanging out, talking about, what you want? I think they marked us off on their sheet and never came back. But neighbors are interesting, aren't they? You know, we all want good neighbors. We don't want bad neighbors. But I remember when my wife and I moved to Syracuse, and we moved into an apartment complex, we had all kinds of neighbors. We had really good neighbors, warm neighbors, welcoming neighbors. I remember the lady across the hall from us worked for Interfaith Works, and she was all about justice. And she even purchased this blanket, this teddy bear blanket for my daughter that she still has today. I remember the neighbor down the hall, he was from China, and when he was moving, he said, look, I can't take all of this stuff with me. Whatever is in here is yours. You can have it. I'm like, wow, how generous is that? I don't have room for all that stuff, but thank you for your generosity, right? We had neighbors on the other side of the spectrum as well. We had a neighbor that we just needed to avoid because every time you encountered this neighbor, it turned into an hour-long conversation. I don't have time for all of that. I don't. You got better things to do, right? Didn't hit me up. We had another neighbor that was just so mean-spirited that he would park his truck in the reserved spaces for our elderly neighbors. And he would intentionally park his car there because nobody was going to mess with him. I turned him in. I called him. I called the folks, called the office on him. I remember one time I told my wife, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to slash his tires. She reminded me that I was the Christian. And I said, yeah, okay, I guess I won't slash his tire. But we had all kinds of neighbors. I remember our next door neighbor, the husband, the father of the family, he converted to another religion, I'll say. And in that, he kind of forced his ideology on the rest of his family. And then every day that we saw them, I can remember seeing the mom of the family just depressed, just sad, just moping around. It was like, wow, this has really impacted their family in a poor way. So Jesus tells us that one of the top 2 commandments is for us to love our neighbor, right? If there are two things that Jesus wants us to remember, to do, to show that we are Christian, it is to love God and to love our neighbor. So I have a good question for Jesus. Jesus, come on, Jesus. Who is my neighbor? Let's clarify this thing, Jesus. Who is it that I'm supposed to care for? Who is it that I'm supposed to interact with, Jesus, so I can get this thing right? Who is my neighbor? Is it the elderly couple? Is it that young family? Is it that black family, that white family, those Hispanics, the Asians? Is it the people who live on that other side of town that I'm never going over there? Is it those Republicans down the hall or the Democrats over that way? Who is my neighbor? Is it those who think like me, who vote like me, who I can have a conversation with, who gives me wonderful gifts and brings food over the house every now and then? Is that my neighbor? Jesus, who is my neighbor? Now, why should any of us be concerned with this question? Why is it important to identify who my neighbor is? Well, because Jesus says it's one of the top two things that we need to be concerned with if we consider ourselves to be Christians. So if you are here today and you're just starting your journey with Jesus, I'm so glad that you're here, because you can hear through this message some of the things that Jesus is requiring, is asking, he's asking Christians to do, to be like. If you're a seasoned pro, and you've been a Christian all your life, that's wonderful. I'm so glad you're here. Maybe you'll hear today some of the things that will shore up your faith, to show you where you might be falling short. And for those of you here who have not connected with Jesus, you have no interest in this Jesus guy at all, somebody just dragged you here kicking and screaming, you're going to church today. God bless you. I'm glad you're here. Because you get to hear how Christians should be treating you. And you get to hear how wonderful this life of Christianity could be if you were to adopt its principles and follow Jesus for yourself. So we would like to look at a story that Jesus actually tells in the book of Luke, chapter 10. So if you have your Bibles, why don't you turn them on or open them up to Luke chapter 10, verse number 30. Now, if you don't have a Bible, you forgot yours, you didn't bring it, whatever reason, raise your hand up high. We have ushers who'll be glad to bring you a Bible, bring it right to your seat. You can't beat that delivery service. Just keep your hand up high, and they will be ready to bring it right to you. If you're in the borrowed Bibles, we'll be on page 892 in the borrowed Bibles. So, as you're flipping to it, let me set it up. It's just Jesus is having a conversation with a lawyer, with an expert in the Jewish law. That means he is an expert in the Old Testament. And so he's having this conversation with the guy, and the guy asks Jesus, how can I get eternal life, Jesus? How can I make sure that I'm going to be in heaven for when I leave this place? How can I make sure that I'm there? Jesus said, well, you're an expert in the law. Why don't you tell me how you're reading it? What does it say to you? And the guy comes back and says, well, I think it's if I love the Lord God with all my heart, soul, and mind, if I love my neighbor as myself. Jesus said, you got it. He gave him, daps him up, gave him a pound, all that stuff. Said, man, you got it. That's it. That's good stuff. But the man, it tells us, goes on to try and justify himself. He tries to justify himself by asking Jesus another question. You know what it means to justify yourself, to make yourself look better than you really are, to make yourself feel good about yourself, to be self-righteous, to show that you have a higher moral character than everybody else, those peons, right? And so he asked Jesus this question. He says, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? If I'm supposed to love my neighbor, then tell me, who is my neighbor? You know, we all do this. You see what he's doing, right? He's narrowing down the playing field. Because Jesus, it can't be everybody. So tell me, Jesus, who is that one person, that two people that I'm supposed to love? And if I love them, I'm going to get into heaven, right? So I just want to do this. I just want to take care of it. If I'm supposed to love somebody, let me check it off my list, Jesus. Right? I love you. I love my neighbor. I'm good to go. We all do that. We all try to narrow down who our neighbor is because loving everybody is hard. And so, Jesus, if I could just love on these folks who think like me, or these folks who live next to me, or these folks who vote like me, or these folks who eat the same food that I eat, or these folks that talk like me, or these folks who have the same cultural practices as me, I'm good, right? Jesus responds to his question in a way that I love about Jesus. Because when somebody asks Jesus a story, guess how he responds? He says, pull up a chair, let me tell you a story. Jesus never answers you like, boom, here's your answer. And I love this story. It's found in verse number 30. Chapter 10, verse 30, it says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. When he was attacked by robbers, they stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. Why, Jesus? Why in the world would you call out these two people, the priest and Levite? Why are you calling them out? Because there's some robbers out there. Why would you not condemn the robbers? They're the ones that committed the crime. Well, Jesus, why is your attention on the church folk and not the criminals, the ones who accosted this man, the ones who getting away with near murder, the ones who robbed him and beat him up? Jesus, why aren't you paying attention to them? I know you omniscient. That's what the Bible says. You can see everything. So I know you see where they are right now. We can call the police and we can go get them right now. Jesus? You know why Jesus calls out the priest and the Levite instead of the robbers? Because these were the church folk. These were supposed to be the godly folk. And they did not do the godly thing. You see, there's a lot of us who consider ourselves Christian. If there was a list and there was a box that we could check, oh man, so many people in Central New York, we would check that box. We're Christians. We're Christians, right? But then there's so much need in Central New York. There's so many problems. So many people who are desperate for help. Who is my neighbor, Jesus? In light of the actions of these two people, Jesus, his implication is that these are not good examples of neighbors. These are not good examples. Do not follow this priest and this Levite. So Jesus, who are our examples? Who can we follow? Who can we look to and say, this is a great example and I need to live like this. I need to do what this person does. Jesus goes on to tell this story. And what he does through this story, we'll see it in a second. What he does is he flips the man's question upside down. See, this expert in the law asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? Jesus says that's the wrong question to answer or ask. That's the wrong question. The right question that we should be asking is, who can I be a good neighbor to? Or how can I be a good neighbor? So how can we be a good neighbor? The first thing that Jesus goes on to say is that we need to cross dividing lines. Cross dividing lines. My wife was over here trying to guess the blanks. And she was like, it's this one, isn't it? It's that. I said, I'm not telling you. You got to listen like everybody else. See, a good neighbor is not simply a person who lives near you. A good neighbor is one person who is willing to get proximate to others. I'm willing to go somewhere. I'm willing to cross dividing lines. I'm willing to enter into your space. That's a neighbor, a good neighbor. Look at verse number 33. It says, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, the beaten up man. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. I am so sure that when Jesus says this Samaritan man, before he can get anything else out of his mouth, that Jewish lawyer is jumping back in shock. Because he's like, Jesus, the Samaritan, that's not people we deal with. They are the people that live on the other side of town. We don't go near them. We don't interact with them. We don't hang out with them. They're different than us. We stay away from them, Jesus. Why would you put a Samaritan in this story to try to teach me a lesson? Let me give you a little history background. There's 700 years before this actually happens. You see, the Assyrians came into Israel and they conquered northern Israel. They conquered northern Israel and they started to intermingle. They started to bring their customs and their cultural practices. And so these people changed over time. This is 700 years that went by. You got different looking babies that's coming around. You got different cultural practices, different religious practices. It's all merged into that. And the Jews said, we're not having none of that. We're going to stay on our side and let them stay on their side of town. We don't mess with them. Matter of fact, if you read the New Testament sometimes, read the Gospels, you'll see that the Jews did everything in their power to avoid Samaritans, or the people in the northern Israel. They would go far lengths around. They would go so far out of their way to avoid anybody who was a Samaritan. They avoided those people at all costs. Who are you avoiding at all costs? Who is it in your life that you're just going to stay away from? Who is it? What group of people? What side of town are you just refusing to go to? What is it an ethnic group? Is it a culture? Is it a socioeconomic status group that you're avoiding? Is it that long-winded person at church? You see him in the lobby, you say, I'm going to leave out the back door today. Yeah. Jesus tells us that this despised person, this Samaritan, was on the wrong side of town. This wasn't his side of town. He's in Jerusalem. He's on the Jewish side of town. He crossed the tracks. You see, this guy intentionally has gone across the dividing line. For some reason, the Bible does not tell us why. He's on the Jewish side of town, but he's there. Now, I can just imagine this Samaritan man in a neighborhood that's not his own, in a place with people who don't look like him, a place where people don't dress the way he dresses, don't have the same cultural practices, don't have the same religious background, they don't eat the same foods. They're different. I'm sure that brings up some nervous feelings in his soul. I felt those feelings. I'm sure that he is scared because we see that in this text, he's walking along the road by himself and he sees a half-dead man laying on the side of the road. What if they do that to me? That's why I don't come to this neighborhood. You see what they do? Sure, he's afraid. I'm sure that he is uncomfortable. Now, we're not told why he's on this side of town, but we know that he intentionally crossed the lines that divided his people from those people. Now, I'm sure you've heard this statistic. If you've been around any length of time, John has talked about this 100 times. That according to the Brookings Institute, Central New York is the 9th most segregated area in the whole United States of America, the land of the free. Our hometown, where we are right now. To be a good neighbor means that we need to cross those lines that divide us. To be a good neighbor means to step outside of your comfort zone every now and then. To be a good neighbor means to get out of the four walls and go and talk to someone, hear someone's story, connect with someone, eat with someone, spend time with someone, dedicate your skills and your talents and your resources to someone who's not like you. That's what a Christian does. And I thank God for this church. You see, God has never called us to do church. That's nowhere in the scripture. Actually, that's grammatically incorrect, to do church. We can't do church because guess what? We are the church. You are the church. The church is us. So he calls us to be the church. That's the right verb. We are to be the church. So wherever we go, the church shows up. Wherever I go, Jesus is there. Wherever you are, the Spirit of God is right there with you. We are the church wherever we go, if you are a follower of Jesus. Now, this church, the Vineyard Church, is such a magnificent place in Central New York. We have so many different ethnic groups represented in this church. We have so many different languages that are spoken by people who attend this church. We have someone in every category of the socioeconomic spectrum in this church. We have every generation represented in this church. But let's not accept our once-a-week church experience. Let's not accept it as our only encounter with variety. You see, good neighbors intentionally cross those lines that divide us. These invisible territorial lines, they go into other places, other spaces, connect with other people, and engage them. The second thing that Jesus calls us to do is to care for those in need. Look at verse number 34. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. This Samaritan didn't stand over the man and say, "How did you get yourself in this mess?" He didn't walk up to the man and condemn him and say, "You know, if you came through here during daylight, then none of this would have happened to you." He didn't tell the man, "You should have pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps." He don't have any boots. They stole the boots. Remember, they got robbed. He doesn't condemn him. He cares for him. The Samaritan cares for this man by addressing his immediate need. This blows my mind. Because watch this. He didn't preach the gospel to him. Gary, I thought you were evangelical. I am. He's not talking about, look, he did not preach the gospel to him. He met his immediate need. Do you know why they have breakfast programs in so many schools? It's because the children are not listening to you if they have an immediate need. If I'm hungry, I cannot hear you. I cannot hear what you're saying because my attention is here. Jesus, everywhere in Scripture, meets people's immediate physical needs before he gives them his message. That's the example we are to follow. We're not supposed to go out here and tell everybody, well, if you had Jesus, everything be right for you. No. We are the called out believers. We are called to care. And we are called out believers to care. We need to meet people's needs so that they can hear what we have to say. Amen. Otherwise, we're wasting our breath. The Samaritan cares for him, and he shows us how to be good neighbors. In Daniel Tiger's neighborhood, Daniel and his mom, they actually get sick one day. But then they have a neighbor that steps up to the plate and helps them out. Let's check that clip out. A neighbor is here to help. A neighbor is here to help. Dun, 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 dun. Y'all see why I'm not on the worship team now? I keep auditioning and Leon won't let me. I want to sing too. And what a simple song to help remind us what a good neighbor actually does. A neighbor is one who helps. I don't know what God has broken your heart for, but I know that there's something in there that you care about. I know that there's someone in there that you care about. I know that there's something that you look around Central New York or this world or wherever and you say, it shouldn't be like that. I care so much about that. What I want you to do is on your outline, whether you're on the Vineyard NY app or on the paper outline, there's a blank right there that says, I care about. I want you to fill that in. Write down who or what it is that God has broken your heart for. Now, finally, the last thing that Jesus wants us to do is to correct what's wrong. To correct what's wrong. Let's look at verse number 35. It says, the next day, he took out 2 denarii, that's 2 silver coins, and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. You see, to correct what's wrong means to restore to a right place or a good condition after being damaged. To make something good or to make up for a wrong that was done. Just because something's not your fault doesn't mean that it's not your problem. You see, Christians are called to repair what's wrong regardless of whether they made the mess or not. That's what Christians do. That's actually what Christianity is. That might mean purchasing a meal or groceries for a family that can't afford it. And then not condemning them because they don't have a job that gives them enough money to pay for it. That might mean apologizing for something that you had no hand in doing, but making it right by dedicating your time or your talent or your resources to that thing. It may mean intentionally being a friend to someone who has historically been disenfranchised and connecting with them and helping them. Whatever it is that God has broken your heart for, whatever it is that the Spirit of God is leading you to, I pray that you would be that kind of neighbor that helps to correct what's wrong. 2,000 years ago, Jesus the Christ came down to be a good neighbor. 2,000 years ago, he left behind his power to come down and be a good neighbor to live amongst us. 2,000 years ago, he left behind his position where he was kicking up his feet. He had a throne. He was chilling. And he came down and lived a perfect life for you and I to see. 2,000 years ago, he gave up all of his privileges. Gave them up to come down and be nailed to a rugged wooden cross to correct what was wrong, to pay for the sins that you and I made, that you and I did, that you and I continue to do. He said, you know what, Father? No. Put it on me. I'll pay for it. Put it on my tab. No. Put another nail in. Oh, they keep doing it. They'll go ahead and stab me. I'll bleed some more. I will take the penalty. I will bear the burden. I will pay for your mess because I'm going to be a good neighbor. He paid the penalty for each one of us. He corrected what was wrong. And he crossed the dividing line of sin to make it happen. He who knew no sin became sin so that you and I could live. When you experience that kind of love for yourself, when you really get this Jesus thing, when you really experience what Jesus is all about, and you get that love in your heart, when you experience that love, you want to love like that. You want to show others, oh my gosh, my life has been transformed by this love. How can I help? How can I show you love? How can I show you the love of Jesus Christ that can turn your life upside down? When you love like that, you want to celebrate with those who celebrate. When you love like that, you want to weep with those who are weeping. It's called spiritual empathy. That's what Jesus calls us to do. Now, when I was in high school, I was a part of the wrestling team. And somebody told me in the last service, that's the only reason John hired you. Because you were the same height and you both were wrestlers. I don't know. But I remember being on the wrestling team all 4 years of high school, and I was one of the smaller wrestlers. I was 125 pounds. That was my wrestling weight. Before that, I was 119. I wrestled at 119. So I gained a little bit of weight, bulked up a little bit. I know y'all still see it, it's all this sexiness going on, but... Some stuff I just need to think of before I say it, and I don't have that filter all the time. I hope this is not the service y'all recording. So, but I was a wrestler, and what I would do at 125 pounds, I would, in practice, I would wrestle the heavier guys. I would wrestle the 225-pound guys. I would wrestle the unlimited weight class guys in practice because I wanted to build up my strength. I was always trying to be stronger or look stronger than what I actually was. So I would wrestle these big guys in practice and tell them, put your full weight on me. Let me experience this. Let me build up my strength. And so I kept trying to build up my strength. And then after some of our practices, we would go down and hit the weight room as if we weren't already worn out. We would go down trying to show off to each other in the weight room. And I remember there was this young man who was always in the weight room minding his business. I don't even know if he went to our school because I never saw him in the hallways in class. He was just always in the weight room. I'm like, okay, I don't know how you got here. But he's always there. So me and some other guys from the wrestling team, we get in the weight room, we lifting weights, we showing off to each other. And I tell them, look, I'm a man. I could bench press 200 pounds. They're like, Gary, you're 125 pounds. You are not bench pressing 200 pounds. I said, free weights too. I'm like, put them on there. Let me show you. I can do it. They put the weights up on there. We put the weights on the bar, and I lay down on the bench. I hear y'all whining already. Y'all haven't even heard the story. I lay down on the bench. I grab the bar, and I put it up. And I go down and up. That's one. I got it. I go down and up. That's two. I got this. I go down and I go down and help. I'm dying. My teammates looking at me, laughing, they talking about me or whatever, and I'm sitting there about to die. I'm struggling. And so I'm trying my best to push, but I can't push my way out. That young man who's always sitting there, minding his business, wasn't part of the team. He gets up, he comes over, and he spots me. And he grabs the weight out of my hands, and he bears the burden on himself, and he pulls it up and puts it on the rack. You see, that guy, he crossed the boundary of team. He didn't have to be a part of the team. He saw a need, and he cared for me. He saw me in need. He saw that I was struggling, and he came over and he bared my burden to get me out of my situation, to get me out of the predicament that I put myself in. And then he didn't condemn me. He didn't look down on me. He didn't talk about me. He didn't say, well, you shouldn't have put that many weights on there, Gary. You know better. You're the littlest guy on the team. No, he helped me in my time of need. You see, he was a good neighbor. Jesus is calling all of us to be good neighbors. We can become better neighbors. We can take one step at a time. He wants us to become better at this. And we get better by crossing the boundaries that hold us back. Crossing the boundaries, intentionally crossing the boundaries that keep us locked in. We do this by caring for others who are in need. Cross the boundaries, care for others, and then correct what's wrong. Don't just come by to have a friend, but put some skin in the game. Spend some time. Give of your skills. Give of your resources to help someone else out to be a good neighbor. Love God, but don't forget to love your neighbor. Will you be a neighbor? Will you be that kind of a neighbor this week? Will you work toward it one step at a time? If you will, I'm going to ask you to make a commitment. Grab your connection card for me. On the back of the connection card, there's an action step. And that action step actually says, I will take a step toward correcting what's wrong this week. You remember on your outline, on point number 2, you filled in the blank and you wrote, I care about blank. I think God has broken your heart for that for good reason, because he wants you to stand in that gap. Will you take a step to correct what's wrong this week? Will you spend a little bit of your time? Will you spend some of your resources? Will you give of your talent? Will you call your friends and invite them into the situation? Say, we can do this together. I'm going to ask you to make that commitment. And I'm going to invite the ushers to come forward, and what they're going to do is hand you a bucket. And you could take your connection card and you could drop it in that bucket, and you could pass it down the row. And I thank you so much for your commitment to making Central New York a better place.